Okay, this is our first lecture for Chapter 8, and now we're going to be building our economic model to study the macroeconomy. We've gone through all the background for macroeconomics, and so now we're going to look at the basic economic model of how we achieve macro equilibrium and what happens if we have inflationary problems or recessionary problems. And this mostly is a Keynesian model because it's based on expenditures. So we're going to have that. There are actually four different levels of spending in the model. There's consumption, there's investment, government, and net exports. We're actually going to do the first three, and I'm just going to leave off net exports, not because it's not relevant, but it adds one more to the model, which just takes up more time and does not really add anything to the analysis. And so I'm going to do is build the model based on these three types of spending. Just realizing that there is net exports, I just don't want to take the time to do that. So again, understand that income is output. And anytime you produce and generate income, you pay workers, you pay for raw materials, you pay for capital equipment, you pay for profit. And so it's the same dollar amount. So in this chapter and in Chapter 9, we're going to be talking about income. We use Y for income. And that's going to represent, again, our production. And so when I say equilibrium level of income, I mean also the equilibrium level of production. Dollar for dollar, they're the same amount. Equilibrium level of income, that means we also have an equilibrium level of output at the same dollar amount. So we're going to have three different categories of spending. In Chapter 8, we're going to look at two of them, consumption and investment, and then in Chapter 9, we'll add in government. So throughout Chapter 8, there is no government in our model, which means there's no government spending and there is no government taxes. So when I talk about income, that means both gross income before tax income and the same dollar amount for after-tax income, because we have no taxes in this model, which I know is not realistic, but we will add that into the model in Chapter 9. So first, let's look at consumption, and C is always going to be consumption. And the first thing we're looking at consumption is that there's going to be propensity to consume, and that it comes from income. And so higher income levels will tend to create higher levels of consumption, while lower incomes will tend to lead to lower levels of consumption. I know that's not earth-shattering, but that is the basic idea of how income affects our consumption. And we're going to have two different kinds of consumption in this chapter. The first one is going to be induced consumption, and that is the consumption that comes from income. Induced means it's caused, so this is the consumption that is caused by having income. Now, the way that income is going to affect our consumption is through a tool known as the marginal propensity to consume, also known as the MPC. The MPC tells us the change in consumption due to a change in our disposable income. And in Chapter 8, all our income is disposable because there are no taxes. So the MPC is answering the question, how much of an additional $100 of income does one spend? And so the MPC can be written mathematically as the change in C, consumption, over the change in Y, income. And again, the delta sign means changing. So a simple question would be, if the MPC is 0.9, what does that tell us? What tells us if you get $1,000 in new income, more income, you're going to spend 90% of that, or 900. And so 900 over 1,000 would give us the 0.9. So we can have different MPCs. We'll focus right there. We can have different MPCs on our exams and homework. If I gave you an MPC of 0.75, what does that tell us? Well, again, you take the same $1,000. And this time, because the MPC is lower, you're going to spend 75% of that, or $750. What do you do with the rest of it? You save it. Now, Keynes did understand how people with higher levels of income, how that would affect the MPC. And this is known as the absolute income hypothesis. And he felt that one's disposable income, as it increases, one's MPC tends to decline. Meaning that if you're a very wealthy person, you get another, I don't know, $10,000, you really don't need it. You already can buy everything you want, and therefore you just put the money into a bank account and forget about it. So very wealthy individuals tend to have a very low MPC, while low-income people tend to have a very high MPC. Low-income people are trying to, they can barely pay their bills, so if they get another, say, $1,000 in income, they'll probably use that to pay off some credit card debt that has high rates of interest, things like that. Now we know that is in real life, but it makes our analysis more difficult. And so what we're going to do in this class is that no matter what your level of income we're going to keep the MPC the same number. Why? It makes it easier for me to ask exam questions, and it makes it easier for students to answer them. And so overall it makes life easier for both the student and the instructor. Now another type of consumption is one that's just going to be given to us, and that's known as autonomous consumption. When you do model building, when you see the word autonomous, that means whatever figure that is, it's a given to the model. And so this would be a number that I will give students on exams. It would be given to the model. What it does mean in real life is that this is the level of income that you need just to get by. So it does not depend on disposable income. It's what I like to call your basic level of spending. Mathematically on a table, which we'll do down here, it's the amount of spending when income is zero. So if you have no income coming in this month, say you were laid off from your job due to the shutdown of the economy, and so no money was coming in, you're waiting for your unemployment benefits to kick in, and so in the meantime this month you have no income. Well, you still have bills to pay. So this would be the money you have to spend on your basic bills, your rent, your utilities, which should be low because you're not going to be using anything. You're going to cut back on your electricity and water. You have to pay, say, your car payment, maybe your phone bill has to be paid because that's your way you can communicate with your boss and potential employers. And so this is the money you spend just to get by. What it really depends on in real life is what it costs to pay your rent and pay for utilities in various parts of the country. So out here in California, living costs tend to be higher, and so this number would be higher for people living in California than opposed to a lower cost state like maybe Alabama or Mississippi. So we have two parts of consumption. We have our autonomous consumption, which I'm going to write as autonomous C, and that's going to be a mathematical constant. And then our induced, we talked about, this comes from income. And so it's going to be a simple equation. It's going to be the MPC times income. Or you can write it this way, MPC parentheses Y. That means the MPC is times income. And so here's our consumption equation. Consumption is equal to the autonomous consumption, your basic level of spending, plus the induced consumption that comes from income. And so what I'll do on the test in the homework is I'll give you a table like this, and I'll give you the number for autonomous consumption, and I'll give you the number for the MPC. And so we start out with zero income, and if no money comes in this month, you still have to pay your bills, and that's your bills there, $500. I know it's kind of low for California, but let's just go with the number 500. And so whatever number is given as the autonomous consumption goes right here. Now we have $1,000 of income, and so you can answer the question one of two ways. You can put 1,000 into the equation. And so our equation here again is going to be C is equal to 500 plus 0.75 times our income. And so you put 1,000 there, 75% of 1,000 is 750. Add that to 500, you get 1,250. What we've done actually, if I just add 750 to that number there, every time I get another $1,000, your spending is going to go up by 750. You can put the 2,000 in there, or an easier way is simply add 750 to that number. That's 2,000. If I put 2,000 there, 75% of that would be 1,500. Add 500 to that, and that gives you the same 2,000. Both ways work. I just happen to know it's going to be consistent all the way down because this is linear. Again, we don't change the MPC. So every time I get another $1,000, I'm going to add 750 to our consumption. Savings will get in it. Now we can also take this data here and we can put it on a graph. See if I can squeeze it in. Okay, get my ruler. So our consumption is going to start right here at 500. And that mathematically is your y-intercept, right? And so your autonomous consumption is your y-intercept. Get in there. Okay. And then now this line here, this is known as a 45-degree line. It cuts the graph here, this right angle, in half. And so the slope of this line is 1. Anytime you go up here, it's going to have to be the same value over here. So consumption equals income along this line. So I call this my consumption equals income line for now. We're going to change it later on when we add an investment. But for right now, there's only consumption for spending, and therefore this to be C is equal to Y. And now we can graph the line. And what I'll do is I'll give us a break here. I'll stop the lecture here, and I'll pick up part 2 right here with graphing the line.